Welcome back to Fund Your Future with DRS. Today, we're breaking down the rule of 72. This is kind of a thing I hear a lot of finance folks talk about, but it's basically just a quick way to estimate how long it can take your money to double when your money's gaining a certain percentage.
Yeah, it's a quick way to think about compound interest. How long will it take for my money to double if I don't do anything else and just keep it invested and it's earning a set rate of return over that time period?
Yeah. So Seth, do you want to just give us kind of the quick math example of how the magic number 72 works into all of this?
Yeah. So the idea is that if you are earning an interest rate, you divide 72 by that interest rate, and that many years is how long it will take to double. So if I'm earning a 9% interest rate, I divide 72 by 9, and that's 8 years. So it'll take my money to double in 8 years. The way I like to think about it is if I'm earning a 7.2% interest rate, it will take 10 years. That makes the math easy. Or if I'm earning a 10% rate, it will take 7.2 years to double. So the general idea is that if you have a set rate, so say you have 6% rate, it's going to take 12 years.
Yeah.
If you have a 12% rate, it's going to take 6 years.
Yeah. And one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this, obviously, is that it relates to money, it relates to DCP and all of these things. And sometimes it's a good way to think about like, oh, should I put more money into my DCP account or even into my regular investments? You can say, well, if I'm earning, say, 6% interest rate on my DCP right now, if I put in $100, that means that $100 will double in the next 12 years.
Yeah. It helps you think about how your money is working for you. I oftentimes like to think about it in the opposite way as well. Like, if I never put another dollar in, what could I expect in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years if it doubles each of those 10 years?
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's used a lot in those folks that are especially planning for early retirement or that financial independence, retire early kind of idea. People are looking at how much money do I need to have in the bank that I cannot put another cent in and just live off of that particular interest.
Yeah. So I've done this sometimes, like when I'm awake at night and can't sleep, and think like, if I were a 30-year-old and I had $100,000 already invested. So we did a book review of, what was the name of that book? The Financial Feminist.
Yes.
Tori
Dunlap.
She was talking about one of the things that she really tries to encourage people to do is get to your first $100,000, because then once you have that money, it really starts working for you. And so if somebody was aggressive, really young, and was able to save $100,000 by the time they were 30, and then they were just earning 7.2%. So it doubles every 10 years. So then at age 40, they have $200,000. At age 50, they have $400,000. If they live to 100, $12.8 million.
Wow.
And that's the thing, like, it's really those last couple of times it doubled. If you live a long time and you haven't touched that money, obviously a person who reaches 65, 70, they're probably going to start taking some of that money out. You're going to have to start taking required minimum distributions. But it just shows you how powerful compounding can be, especially over a long period of time.
Yeah, and especially from an early age.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this comes up all the time of trying to push people that are under 35 especially to, set any kind of money you have extra aside now. Or not to say that you have to live off of ramen and withhold those, certain fun things, but really thinking about putting some of that extra money aside so that it can double over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that can be so powerful for folks too. If you save earlier, you will have less need to save later on because you have benefit of time working for you. The other thing that I think can be beneficial to think about with the rule of 72 is when think about like inflation or think about small interest rates. So 72, if you divide it by 3, so you say 3% is the rate of inflation. So 72 divided by 3 is 24 years. So if inflation is 3%, you can expect prices to double in 24 years.
Okay.
So people think, I remember when a gallon of gas was only $2 and it's $4 now. Well, if that was 24 years ago, that's actually about right.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the normal, what you would expect in the course of inflation. If it is around 3%, you would expect prices to double between the time you're a teenager and your middle age, double once in that time period. So that's a normal rate of inflation, 3% or 2.5% or 4%, somewhere in that kind of around 3%. So that way you can think about this. The other thing, I went down a crazy rabbit hole last night because I love math. And I was trying to remember why the rule of 72 works. And everything I read reminded me it's just an approximation. And actually, it's more precise if you had a rule of 70. That's a little more accurate, but 72 is divisible by a lot of different numbers. You can divide it by 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or 9 or 8. Where 70, you can only divide it by 7 and 10 and 2 and 5. There aren't as many options.
Interesting.
That's another reason the rule of 72 oftentimes gets brought up. But oftentimes you're just thinking about 8 or 9%. Like
yeah.
8 years, 9%. 9%, 8 years.
Yeah. And you can find stats on the internet where it's like if you look at the general growth of the stock market over the last 100 years has grown at a rate of somewhere between 7 to 10%. And so that's one of those arguments, I have friends that are like, oh, the stock market's a pyramid scheme. I'm like, no, it's not.
Well, and I think that's the other thing to keep in mind is that even if you're earning 6%, and oftentimes people would say that's pretty conservative, it's still going to double in 12 years.
Yeah.
It's not 8 or 9 years, but it's still pretty quick, an entire lifetime if you're started off saving at a younger age. So it can be helpful to see between 6%, 8%, 9%, 12%. The doubling happens a little bit more quickly. And if you live a really long time and earn that higher rate over a really long time, you'll have a couple more chances to double. But the power of the compounded interest is really about the number of times you get to double.
Yeah. And obviously, the younger you are, the more your money can double.
Yeah, exactly. But I think even for our folks who are closer to retirement, thinking about, as you're mentioning, your deferred comp balance or your Plan 3 balance at age 60.
Yeah.
If you don't plan on touching that money until 70 or 73 when you have to start taking a required minimum distribution, it likely or could double in that time.
Yeah, from age 65 to 75.
Yeah, I think sometimes people look at their balance and like, oh, I wish it was bigger. It's $250,000. Am I going to be able to live off that in retirement? Well, if you're not going to touch it for another 10 years, maybe $500,000 makes you feel a little bit better or a little bit safer. Now, inflation, there's other things that are balanced with that. But oftentimes we've been talking about over the last couple of months, thinking about when do you need the money as well as a big part of the conversation. When you're saving it in your 20s and 30s, you don't know when you're going to need it.
Yeah. And like you said, as a state employee, if you're vested and you've worked a number of years, hopefully you're already collecting that pension at 65. And then you hopefully can kind of set aside some of those DCP funds for a couple years to grow a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a really a topic for a different discussion. And we talked a little bit with Kirk from the Social Security Administration about this, about also deciding when you're going to start collecting your Social Security. Like there's a lot of different factors to take into consideration there. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. The rule of 72 is oftentimes shared in personal finance circles when really it's just an example of compounding.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the rule memorized or anything, but it's just a quick shorthand, once again, approximation of, and you're never going to have perfect 8% returns every year for 9 straight years.
Exactly. That's a good point to mention, that obviously we know that markets fluctuate. It's not always going to be the same percent of interest, but it just gives you an idea.
Yeah.
And hopefully a little bit of a motivator. And for all those of us who are not particularly love to do the math, there's tons of charts online. If you just Google the rule of 72, you can see an easy chart of how that transfers over, or even better, use a tool out there like compounding interest calculator. You can put in, I have this balance. We even have one on the DRS website for the DCP calculator. You can say, this is my balance in DCP. Here's the percentage rate that I'm getting right now. And your DCP account can tell you that, what your percent is, and you can see how much it will grow over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, project out to the future. Be excited to continue to save more.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Jenny, anything else about the rule of 72?
Well, of course, always if folks have questions about this or any other finance questions, you can send us an email to drs.podcasts@drs.wa.gov.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and now we'd love to hear from you. What topics would you like to hear about? What questions do you have for us? Send an email to drs.podcasts@drs.wa.gov. That's drspodcasts@drs.wa.gov. The Department of Retirement Systems provides this podcast as a public service, but it's neither a legal interpretation nor a statement of DRS policy. References to any specific product or entity do not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by DRS employees are those of the employees and do not necessarily reflect the view of DRS or any of its officials.